Okay, Fiona, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me here. I'm immensely honoured to be here. And Tobias is a hard act to follow, so I would say, and now for something completely different. First of all, before we get to the heart of the discussion, I would like to take you on a short trip for you to observe the vibrant lettering that abounds in one of the most densely populated cities in the world. We'll turn it down. So this is Bengali lettering. This is the famous College Street. So I'd like to discuss how this lettering, this vibrancy and diversity of lettering is not, however, reflected in the range and the use of Bengali typefaces. I'd like to show you how this came about and what can and is being done to resolve this. So I have mentioned in other talks, but it is worth underlining here that with regard to many Indian scripts, we are not talking about minority scripts, but those that are employed for textual communication by millions of users. And if we include speakers, Bengali speakers from Bangladesh and those of other languages that use the Bengali script, there are some 300 million Bengali script users. As Roger said to me recently, this is nearly the size of the population of the United States. These Bengali scripts, all these Indian scripts are principally syllabic and descended from the Brahmi script. And therefore they do show an affinity to each other, although noticeable differences developed through the use of different writing tools and materials. As elsewhere, rapid dissemination of information by textual communication has been the role of the newspaper industry, whose print editions continue to occupy a vital role in India, even with the development of online editions. And these are just some of the newspaper typefaces for digital composition that I was responsible for developing during my time at Linotype UK. And of these, the Bengali typeface, also used for Assamese, is of particular significance. This one here. At least for this talk, as I shall explain. So the Bengali script is, I think, perhaps my favorite of all scripts. It has both an elegance and a dynamic quality. It seems to dance along the line. It is a unicase, mainly joining script that reads from left to right. and this is an 18th century manuscript in the decorative or more formal hand. And even so, one can see from this detail that the headline is curved, and very few attempts have been made to replicate this feature in type. Bengali has a wonderful literary tradition, as was recognized worldwide in the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Literature to Rabindranath Tagore in 1913. However, it may be unknown to many that Bengali newspapers are also thriving, and the leading newspaper of Anandabazar Patrika, first published in March 1922, and seen here alongside its younger sister publication, Ebela. So this one here. This has a daily circulation of the print edition of well over 1 million copies, with the number of readers estimated at 5.6 million. And this has been achieved under the editorship of Avik Sarkar, who trained under Harold Evans, and whose newspaper exhibits first-class typographic design that seems sorely lacking in many papers. Yeah, my favorite slide. So the publishing house, Anandabazar Patrika, ABP as it's known, was instrumental in the inception of Bengali script on Linotype hot metal machines. It was central to the development of the keyboard layout and the typeface, which was endorsed by Rabindranath Tagore himself in 1937. ABP made a use of a range of well-executed foundry types that averaged around 500 characters per font, comprising independent vowels. I shall try and point these out. So along here, base consonants, consonantal clusters, vowel signs, and some ligatures. These were often designed as combinations that were designed together. However, the line caster that was preferred for newspaper setting required a much reduced character set for Bengali composition, and attempts were made to reduce this character repertoire to 90 characters to compete with English language setting speeds from a 90-channel keyboard. But this had to be abandoned to the set you see here, with 127 characters per weight in the main magazine. And few people resorted to the use of the side magazine since it incurred additional expense and slowed down composition. This is the detail of the main magazine. And weights were also duplexed, meaning that the light and bold necessarily occupied the same width. The Linotype did enable the mass dissemination of printed material, particularly for newspapers, but many say it mutilated the Bengali script, as conjuncts or ligatures were made of common components. So we see these here, which could not fit well in all circumstances, and it prohibited overhanging and interlocking elements, i.e. kerning. So towards the end of 1978, after just starting at Linotype UK, I became involved in the project of converting the Linotype hot metal Bengali fonts straight to digital typesetting for ABP, but I was keen to overcome the obvious deficiencies of hot metal composition. This is a detail from the same paper. So as we can see here, there's no kerning of the vowel sign at the beginning, and this vowel sign here is unattached to the preceding host character. And if you recall the lettering that you saw on the manuscript and the foundry type, this typeface has lost some of the grace and the vitality that we saw in those. So with this in mind, I engaged in researching into manuscripts and foundry types, and in consultation with Dr. Charapada Mukherjee, a Bengali scholar, teaching at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and with the invaluable collaboration of the brilliant designer Tim Holloway, who produced the final artwork, we experimented with new forms. In fact, we suggested new designs for 3 type forms for the typeface to ABP. And the approval of these, which effectively represented the key elements of all Bengali letter forms, gave us license to abandon a direct conversion and to design an original typeface. We were conscious that there were readers who were only accustomed to the linear forms of the Linotype machine, but ABP, true to their enduring pioneering spirit, felt that the benefits of the new design for newspaper composition overcame any necessity to pander to reader conservatism. Aside from re-expanding the character set, we needed to develop software that could accurately position superscripts and subscripts, as you see here. And for newspaper setting, being mindful of economies of space, we were keenly aware of the necessity to monitor how wide the characters might be and also how deep and how tall. So this one could actually, bear in mind, could also take a subscript. So in other words, we needed to develop a cohesive design that could set as many words to the line as possible and not necessitate overcopious leading, whilst remaining readable at text sizes. And these are just some pairs of characters that should be clearly identifiable from each other in small sizes. Note that the widths of the light and the bold are still approximately the same. For aesthetics, as well as for ensuring economies of space, we needed to enlarge the character set to at least 300 glyphs. And this necessitated the use of software to merge fonts that exceeded the then customary 256 sorts. And it led to the invention of the Linotype Phonetic keyboard for Indian scripts by me and my Linotype colleague Mike Fellows, with the endorsement of ABP in 1978. And this keyboard was deliberately never patented, as we understood that the freeing of the character set from the limitation of the prescribed number of keyboard codes facilitated the design of original typefaces and enabled the use of standard hardware for Indian script typesetting. This is on a Mac, this is slightly later than 78. And a form of this method of keyboarding is now the standard method of keyboarding today. Now this is a detail from several pages, and those characters on the left are those on the keyboard. And those on the right are designed conjuncts or consonantal clusters within the font. And you can see from looking at the variation in shape of these why the use of common components to generate these forms is really not desirable. The first newspaper using the digital Linotype Bengali appeared in February 1981. And aside from some plaudits and an increase in readership, the digital Linotype Bengali did receive a considerable degree of very public criticism that ABP had anticipated. The criticism being that it was a retrogressive design that reintroduced outmoded manuscript forms. And as we can see from this 1983 newspaper, I'm not sure if you see where I've circled a bit here, we recognize some improvements were necessary, but mainly to do with the spacing. And here is a comparison of the old and the new design. And the bottom line replicates in the digital fonts the lower line of the hot metal. We were fortunate in that backwards compatibility for copy fitting purposes was not an issue we had to face. And in fact, as you can see here, the line length was greatly improved. We ourselves felt some tweaking was in order. Look at the join here. And here we collaborated with ABP, who also asked for an extra bold weight, but Linotype denied this request for economic reasons, and indeed ABP had to wait for another 30 plus years for this. We collaborated frequently through the development. Here is a letter to me from ABP. This is for the younger ones, days before we had even fax. And we developed a terminology with which to communicate. And improvements continued with the update to desktop publishing with PostScript fonts, which exploited new technological advances. Don't get excited, this is not baseball, this is a cricketer. I'm afraid all my examples are of cricket. However, Linotype UK was closed down in 1996 and no longer supported the Linotype Bengali fonts. ABP turned to an Indian software house to convert the fonts to OpenType. The conversion was not as clean design-wise as I would have liked, and indeed the last few decades have seen many clones of varying quality of the Linotype Bengali springing up, the typeface now usually known as ABP Bengali. So, take 4 newspapers. Therefore, despite quite vociferous complaints against this original type design when it first appeared, And given that since the mid-90s, Linotype Bengali has not been available for sale legitimately, it is surprising that this style has dominated and continues to dominate print publishing since the mid-1980s. So ABP is the top left one, the only one for whom the typeface was legitimately designed. So I want to give you a taste of its seeming ubiquity, which stands in complete contrast to the lettering diversity we saw on the streets. So here is a magazine stall. The first column is mainly Hindi magazines here. All the rest are in Bengali. A number of these, like the very popular Desh magazine, is produced by APB Group, but not all of these. They all use the same body copy. This is a magazine from our collection at Reading. Interesting and imaginative title on the cover, but again, the same body copy. I visited the excellent Jadavpur University Press in December, where I had an interesting discussion with Dr. Abhijit Gupta, the director of the press, about which printer produced the best version of this typeface. Printing is contracted out to different printers, but all use to varying degrees of success the same typeface. The same is true in books on sale in the famous College Street. Interesting and imaginative title designs, same body copy or a clone. Dan Rattigan, who's here, will recognize two of these pictures as part of his work. Packaging and branding also has the same. We find the same in products for children, and then in billboards, so where we design for something to be readable at 8-point or 9-point, it's rather disarming to find that there's posters where the characters are actually taller than oneself. And even in 2015 upgrade at Kolkata Airport, the signage there. So, on visiting the ABP offices in 2008, the editor Avik Sarkar pointed out ABP's long-felt need, 30 years plus, for more text typefaces than just 1 in 2 weights. He needed a low-contrast font for differentiation, having been dissatisfied with those on offer. And although no longer with Linotype, Tim Holloway and I were commissioned to undertake the design, and John Hudson agreed that Tiro Typeworks would undertake the production. So we planned the character set that would meet ABP's requirements, realizing that this would be expanded to a larger glyph set of contextual alternates to make use of open type features, and we finalized at about 500. Tim began sketching his usual lettering trials for us to review whilst I conducted research. But we abandoned the trials at this size as they were not effective at resolving the problems that Avik had discussed with me, some of which were marked on this paper on the right. I don't know what A4 is in US size, but this is A4. So we needed to experiment by drawing at large sizes and tackled the bold weight first, since this would cause us the greatest problems. Now, one of the problems highlighted by Avik was of what he described as, I quote, having too many tenants in the attic. So to overcome this, we realized that manuscript forms could assist us. We could use some visual effects where the eye either completed the character or did not notice a difference in depth. So you can see here, this is the vowel sign that would follow, and the eye completes it. So it's actually the ascender, its own ascender is completing the vowel sign. And here, this you find in manuscripts where the headline, which usually is continuous, is lowered in order to accommodate the ascender within the kerning vowel sign. And we also needed to make sure that for particularly the bold, that the counters were visible, and we experimented with angling the subscripts on deep forms because these counters needed to be open. So with a low contrast design, the type forms necessarily became considerably wider. And in order to overcome this, we introduced final forms that one can observe in foundry types. So you can see here and here, this is enlargement, there is no continuing headline. And as usual, we conducted various trials, and I discussed these and the rules in person when I visited Avik Sarkar at ABP in Kolkata again in 2011, who approved the design. And this approval was essential, since there were a number of innovative features, some of which are described here, where you can see chopping with ascenders and taking a few liberties in order to obtain effective results. It was essential that these were, that he accepted these, because we were unsure whether they would gain acceptance from the readership. So the new design was intended for the launch of the new tabloid newspaper, which was called Abella, aimed at a younger readership and at a format readable on the Metro. And a number of these rules depended on the use of OpenType and InDesign. And in India, again, ABP led the way on insisting on using both. But we also found that some features were actually not feasible with current software and had to be disabled. This is the first edition. I should add that, unfortunately, while designing the Bold, Tim became ill and could not continue. Therefore, Nilakash Kshetrimayan, a Reading MATD graduate who spoke here last year, and very talented type designer, then living in Manipur, joined the team. So thus we completed the font with me in Europe, Neil in India, and John in Canada, and the first typeface made the stands in Kolkata as planned on the 31st of August 2012. But as one could perhaps expect, implementation has not necessarily been straightforward. And here in the online edition, you can see on the top one that there are still too many tenants in the attic, which are actually resolved here below. But although processing software does not permit final forms, much of these features are now in place. And it has encouraged Neil and me, with the production assistance of John Hudson, to embark on a new design for ABP that is inspired by one of its foundry types, shown here. And I will just show you a glimpse of this project here. So the idea is to supply the ABP group with an alternative text face. This says Ananda Bazar. Here you can see a different voice supplied by different proportions and emphasis, and a deliberate inkiness. This is very much a work in progress. But I think that this image, with the two typefaces, the Linotype ABP on the left and the new one on the right alongside each other, gives you some idea of the different voice for textual composition that finally might emerge from the apparent ubiquity of Linotype Bengali. Little did Tim and I know what we were doing back then to the typographic landscape of West Bengal. But having said that, Neil and I, again with John undertaking the production, undertook and finally delivered last December, over 30 years after the initial request, and following the gentle persuasion of Arup Sarkar, publisher ABP, the Linotype Bengali Extra Bold, which we based on the original Linotype Bengali digital designs. And we have plans for some other styles. This says his name, Avik Sarkar, at the top. And this is the first edition using the ABP Bold, which is this year. So what of other Indian scripts that are also employed by many millions? Well, we are seeing the emergence of new high-quality designs, but much still needs to be done to provide a choice of good quality fonts that are fit for purpose and that allows rich typographic expression for the intelligent user. Witness these online images. Okay, my resolution of the camera was probably not good, but this is again, Sri Lanka versus England cricket that happened very recently. And you've got characters missing, counters filling in, overcopious leading, very difficult to identify some of the elements, some strange proportions, very diminished vowel signs. I could go into greater depth. So, and also, so the problem is that readability is compromised, in other words. So similarly, when I was recently in Calcutta, I observed that the transliteration of Bengali into Latin script continues to be the preferred method of sending readable text messages on mobile phones. So if you think of the millions of users, this is really not, it hardly bears thinking about. So for another recent project commissioned by Harvard University Press, John and I were lucky to continue the design approach that I have long advocated of research-based design in collaboration with a team whose different skills can inform the process and the outcomes of which exploit current type-making and composing tools. So we considered past and contemporary lettering traditions along with readers' needs. So to give you a flavor, so here we have a 19th century Punjabi devotional manuscript prayer book, and here a 20th century Devanagari type specimen produced by the renowned Nirnaya Sagar Press, and here a Telugu type specimen slightly earlier than that from the Swatantra type foundry. And all of these inspired the respective script designs which adopt a contemporary take on traditional forms, as shown here in extracts from the Punjabi, the Telugu, and the Hindi. We found the need to design specially tailored kerning superior numerals that John undertook for the notes section. And for some reason or other, Ratna and I are extremely proud of this. But, or rather pleased with it, I should say. So returning to the street lettering we saw earlier, I believe that in following an approach that combines research and inspiration and experimentation, that draws on collaborative input from different disciplines, and intelligent implementation, so production and use, it is possible to capture in type the vibrancy and the skillful execution of letter forms that are fit for purpose, as seen here on the bus, which transliterates from Devanagari as viva. So to end on a perhaps a somewhat corny note, let's just say viva, or long live rich visual expression in whichever language or script. Thank you.